The yacht cut through black water under a moonless sky. Ethan Caldwell stood at the helm, alone, the salt wind sharp against his face. He had chosen this route deliberately, far from shipping lanes, far from prying eyes. The boat was new, paid for in cash, registered under a name no one would trace back to the man who coached youth soccer on weekends and sat on the board of 3 children's charities. He smiled into the darkness. Freedom tasted like this, clean and vast. The storm came without warning. One moment the sea was glass. The next it rose in walls of water that smashed the hull like a fist. Ethan fought the wheel until the deck tilted vertical and the ocean swallowed everything. He woke on the sand, lungs burning, tasting blood and brine. Palm fronds rattled overhead. The island stretched green and silent around him. He staggered inland until he found the house. It crouched on a low hill, white stucco, glowing in the first grey light. All clean lines and wide verandas. A man waited at the top of the steps. Tall, silver-haired, dressed in crisp linen. He carried himself like a man who had once worn a uniform and never shed the posture. "You are fortunate," the man said. "Most who wash up here do not live long enough to reach the house." Ethan managed a laugh that came out more like a cough. "Lucky me. I am called the General. Come inside. You will want dry clothes and food." The interior was cool and spare. Polished teak floors, high ceilings, art that looked expensive and old. They ate on the veranda over coffee and fruit and dark bread. Below them, the jungle rolled down to a crescent beach. No other houses. No smoke. No sign of the world beyond the reef. "You were wondering how I knew you were coming," the General said. "I figured someone would notice a wrecked boat eventually." "No one will notice. This place is not on any chart, and those who arrive are always interesting." The first prickles started at the base of his neck. "Interesting how?" "I once hunted every animal worth hunting. Lion, leopard, bear, buffalo. Then I grew bored. Animals follow instinct. They do not plan. They do not fear the way a man fears." He leaned forward slightly. "So I turned to the only game that still challenges me. Man." Ethan laughed, shorter this time. "You're joking. I never joke about hunting." The General's eyes were steady, pale blue. "Tonight, I give you food, rest, a knife, a map. At dawn, I begin the hunt. 12 hours head start. Survive 3 full days, and I return you to the mainland with $1 million. And my word, this never happened. If I find you first..." He spread his hands. "That has not happened yet. No trace of humor. Only certainty." "I accept," Ethan said. The General smiled, small and satisfied. "Excellent." He dreamed of corridors turning into locker rooms, empty playgrounds after dark. He woke before dawn, dressed in dark clothing and sturdy boots left out for him. A sheath knife waited on the dresser. A folded map lay beside it. At the jungle's edge, 2 sleek hounds sat at the General's heels, black and tan, eyes glowing in the half-light. They did not bark. They watched. 12 hours, the General said. "Use them well." The first day passed in a blur of motion. He kept to ridges, avoided obvious trails. By noon, sweat soaked through his shirt. He found a stream, drank, filled his canteen. The island was roughly oval, perhaps 10 miles long, ringed by cliffs on 3 sides. One small cove held a dock. That would be the endgame. He built no fire. Night fell fast. He wedged himself into the crook of a massive banyan, knife in hand, listening. Somewhere distant, a hound bayed once, low and deliberate. Then silence. Dawn came. The hunt began. He heard the first shot at mid-morning, a single crack far off, followed by something heavy, crashing through underbrush. Not aimed at him. Yet. The general was methodical, sweeping sectors, using the dogs to cut scent trails, forcing mistakes. By the second afternoon, Ethan understood the true terror. The general did not rush. Every trail was anticipated. Every stream crossing held a fresh bootprint on the opposite bank. Twice he glimpsed the hounds gliding through shadow, silent as smoke. Once he heard the general's voice, calm, calling them back. The sound carried across a ravine, like a blade. He set a deadfall near a choke point, waited until he heard the dogs, cut the vine. One hound yelped as the logs struck, and did not rise. Something sharp and clean moved through him. He was learning. He was surviving. On a third morning, he reached the northern cliffs. Below, the dock waited, a motor launch tied to the pilings. 2 hours of lead. He descended using roots and vines, reached the sand, sprinted. The general was already there. He stood on the dock, rifle slung over one shoulder, the remaining hound at his side. Almost relaxed, Ethan stopped 20 yards away, chest heaving. "I'm taking the boat." "You may try." Water lapped against the hull. The hound panted softly. The general reached into his pocket and drew out a slim tablet. He tapped the screen once and slid it across the weathered planks. "Look," he said. Ethan knelt, knife ready, and picked it up. A folder labeled simply, Caldwell. Police reports from 3 states. Dates matching vacations. Screenshots of encrypted chats on servers he'd been assured were untraceable. Stills from hidden cameras he had never known existed. Travel itineraries. Hotel reservations. Names of children he'd coached, tutored, sponsored. Every careful step. Every deletion he had paid for. All there. All recovered. His hands began to shake. "No one washes ashore here by accident," the general said. "We take only those who have hunted the most forbidden game and believe they escape justice. A network places the invitations. A false mayday. A storm that is never quite a storm. You accept it because you thought yourself untouchable." Ethan looked up. "This is vigilante nonsense. You're no better than—" "I do not claim to be better. I claim to be necessary. The law fails when the powerful prey on the powerless. We provide an alternative." A final sentence. The faces on the screen blurred. He remembered everyone. "You told yourself the others were weak," the general continued, "that you were different. But every man who stood where you stand now believed the same thing. You're insane. Perhaps." The rifle lifted, almost gently, "But I am correct." The hound growled once. Ethan looked from the tablet to the general, to the boat. The trap had not closed when the storm hit. It had closed years ago, the moment he first looked at a child and saw not a person, but an opportunity. He dropped the knife. It thudded softly onto the dock. "You have one choice left," the general said. "Run, or stand." Ethan did neither. He looked at the other man and saw not madness, not cruelty, but recognition. The same cold clarity he had once carried when he knew he would not be caught. The general raised the rifle. Ethan closed his eyes. The shot echoed across the water, sharp and final. The jungle swallowed the sound. The hound sat quietly beside its master. The general looked down at the body for a long moment, then turned and walked back toward the house, the tablet under his arm, the rifle over his shoulder. Behind him, the island waited, silent and untouched, for the next guest who would believe himself lucky. The borrower. The trouble with Mr. Vedder began, as most troubles do in Molensloot, on a Tuesday. He arrived in the village the way fog arrives, which is to say nobody saw him come, and nobody could agree on when exactly he had been absent. One morning there was simply a light burning in the old Copeman house at the end of Lineburn, and a small brass plate screwed to the doorpost that read, H. Vedder, Keeper of Lost Things. The plate was very clean, and the letters were very neat, and Grietje at the bakery said it gave her a feeling she could not name, which was strange because Grietje had a name for everything. Mr. Vedder himself was the sort of man whose face you described in terms of other faces. He had eyes like someone's uncle, a nose that reminded you of a schoolteacher you had liked. His coat was brown, and he carried a leather satchel that seemed always to be nearly, but not quite full. He smiled easily, and his teeth were all in the correct positions. He introduced himself to the alderman on Wednesday. People lose things, he said. Things of value. Not always objects. He would find them for a modest fee. The alderman, whose reading glasses had been missing for 3 months, hired him on the spot. The glasses were returned by Thursday morning. The alderman did not ask how. He mentioned Mr. Vedder to his wife. His wife mentioned him to the schoolmistress, and by the following Monday, a small queue had formed outside the house on Lineburn. Mrs. Albers had lost her late husband's confidence in her judgment. Mr. Vedder returned it in a small envelope that smelled of paper and dried chamomile. She felt the difference immediately, she said, like putting on a coat she had forgotten she owned. Young Thomas Bink had lost 2 years of certainty about his future. Mr. Vedder returned them in 4 days in a parcel wrapped in brown paper. Thomas opened it alone in his room and stood very still for a long time. And when his mother called him down to supper, he answered in a voice somewhat flatter than the one he had gone upstairs with, but perfectly pleasant. Schoolmistress de Vries had lost her patience. This had happened gradually, in the way rivers lose their banks, and she had resigned herself to its absence. Mr. Vedder returned it in a small glass jar with a cork stopper. She used it sparingly after that, which was not at all what patience was for, but she used it. Nobody asked where these things had gone when they were lost, or how Mr. Vedder had known where to look. In Molensloot, this was considered good manners. You did not ask the miller how grain became flour. You simply received your bread. It was Grietje's daughter Ans who noticed first, because Ans was 17 and had not yet learned to stop noticing things. She noticed that Mrs. Albers now agreed with whatever her husband had thought, which was convenient because he was dead, but which meant she had stopped thinking new things entirely. She noticed that Thomas Bink had abandoned his plan to study in Haarlem and had taken a position at the cannery where certainty about one's future was neither required nor welcome. She noticed that schoolmistress de Vries had stopped making errors in her lessons, which should have been an improvement, but which made the lessons feel like a corrected manuscript, accurate and without any living presence behind the words. She said nothing until the morning her mother told her, brightly, that she had visited Mr. Vedder the previous afternoon. Her mother's expression shifted in the small way that mouths shift when a true answer and a comfortable one are not the same answer. Worry, she said at last. I lost my worry about you. It was taking up so much room. Ans looked at her mother's face. It was her mother's face. the same eyes and nose, and the same lines at the corners that appeared when she laughed. Nothing was missing from it. There was simply something present in it that Ants could not name, an absence that had taken on weight and sat in the space behind her mother's eyes, like a very contented lodger. That evening, Hans stood at the window of her room and looked down Leinbahn at the light in the Kopman house. The light was yellowish and steady, the kind of light that has been burning a long time. She went to see him in the morning. Mr. Vedder opened the door before she knocked. He seemed entirely unsurprised, the way a doctor is unsurprised by illness, and he invited her in with a small gesture that managed to be both welcoming and precise. The front room was clean and bare, except for a long wooden cabinet against one wall. The cabinet had many drawers of varying sizes. Some of the drawers had labels that Hans could not read from the doorway. Some had no labels at all. Mr. Vedder settled into his chair and laced his fingers together and looked at her with his uncle's eyes and said, "You have lost something too." "I have not," said Hans. "You will," he said, in the tone of someone predicting mild weather. She said, "I want to know what you do with them, the things you find." He considered this for a moment, with what appeared to be genuine appreciation, the way a person considers an unexpected question in a game they have been winning easily for a very long time. He said, "I keep them." She said, "In the cabinet." "In the cabinet?" He agreed. She said, "Those are not found things. Those are taken things. There is a distinction." He smiled. His teeth were all still in their correct positions. "They were lost," he said. "A lost thing without a keeper becomes nothing at all." "I provide the keeping," she said, "and the people who lost them. What are they now?" "Lighter," he said. "Cleaner. A person who no longer worries is a person with more room for contentment." She said, "A person who no longer worries about her daughter is not a mother. She's a woman who used to have a daughter and now has something else instead. A pleasant feeling." Mr. Vedder looked at her for a moment that lasted approximately the length of a small but important decision being made. He said, "You are very young to understand that." She said, "Open the cabinet." He said, "No." She crossed the room and pulled the nearest drawer open before he was finished saying no. Inside was a small quantity of something that looked very slightly like light, except that light does not have a texture, and this did, and the texture was the specific texture of a Tuesday afternoon in childhood, when nothing in particular happens, and nothing in particular needs to. The drawer above it held a sound she heard without hearing it, the way you hear music from another room and know exactly which room of your memory it belongs to. She closed both drawers. She turned to look at Mr. Vedder. He was watching her with the uncle's eyes and the schoolteacher's nose, and an expression that had stopped being welcoming and had become something else, not threatening, worse than threatening, patient. He said, "You understand what I provide." She said, "You provide an ending for things that needed to keep going." He considered this and then said, "The town is quieter than it was." "You cannot tell me that is without value." She said, "The town is quieter in the way a house is quiet when nobody is home." She took her mother's worry from the cabinet because it was the only drawer with her mother's name on it, written in that very neat handwriting, and she walked to the door. Mr. Vedder did not stop her. He sat in his chair with his hands still laced and watched her go. And just before she stepped out, she felt it, the specific gravity of being offered something, not spoken, simply available. The drawer, with her own name on it. She did not turn around. She did not look back as she walked down Langbarn. The light in the Kopman house was still yellow and steady, and in no hurry at all. Her mother was at the kitchen table when Aunts returned. She looked up, and her face did the small, complicated movement that faces do when they are very pleased to see someone and also afraid for them and not sure what to do with either at once. Ans set the small envelope down on the table. Her mother looked at it. She said, "What is that?" Ans said, "It is yours." Her mother did not pick it up. She looked at it the way you look at a piece of furniture returned to its original position that you had forgotten was supposed to be there. She said, "It was very heavy to carry." Anne said, "I know." Her mother said, "He told me it was making room for better things." Anne said, "It was already the better thing." They sat together for a while, in the kitchen with the envelope between them. Outside, Mollensloot went about its Tuesday. The canal moved. The mill turned. On Leenbahn, the light in the Kopman house burned yellow and steady and patient. The brass plate on the door still read, H. Vedder, Keeper of Lost Things. It was very clean, and the letters were very neat, and nobody who looked at it could say precisely when they had stopped finding it reassuring. In the land of Clearfield, where people liked to know where they stood, and even more where others stood, there walked a figure in blue. She was known as the Blue Champion, though she preferred to be seen as a guardian of equality and peace. Her cloak was a careful shade of deep blue, and her words were sharpened into reason. She spoke of space, of recognition, of the right to be who one was, and people listened. "We must tolerate one another," she said in the square. "We must see one another," she said in gatherings. "We must make room for one another," she said wherever ears were open. People nodded. It sounded right. It sounded good. It sounded like something no one could oppose without becoming suspect. At her side stood Mr. Doubt, a man not so much opposed as inclined to understand. "May I ask something?" he said one afternoon. The Blue Champion smiled. She liked questions, provided she already knew the answer. "Of course," she said. "Does that tolerance also apply to someone who disagrees with you?" asked Mr. Doubt. The smile remained, though thinner. "Disagreement is permitted," she said, "as long as it is not harmful." "And who decides what is harmful?" he asked. A small silence followed. "Not large enough to be noticed, but large enough to be felt. That is evident," she said. "It follows from understanding." "Whose understanding?" asked Mr. Doubt. Then something shifted. Her words, usually so fluid, began to tighten. Not because she lacked them, but because they were no longer meant to connect. "Not everything is open to debate," she said. "Not everything deserves space," she said. "Not everything must be tolerated," she said. Her voice rose. Her breath shortened. The people in the square looked at one another. Some still nodded, though less certain. "But you said—" Mr. Doubt began. "What I said," she interrupted, "was within a framework." "Your framework," he said. "The correct framework," she replied. The word correct hung in the air like a lock. Mr. Doubt glanced around. And if someone falls outside that framework? He asked. Then they fall outside, said the blue champion. It was a simple answer. Too simple, perhaps. Someone stepped forward. A woman who was not angry, but not convinced either. I understand your aim, she said, but not your boundary. The boundary is necessary, said the blue champion. For peace? The woman asked. For justice, she replied. And those who do not fit that justice? The woman asked. The blue champion paused. Briefly, but long enough. They must learn, she said. And if they do not? Asked Mr. Doubt. Then something broke. Not visibly, but in tone. Then they do not belong here, she said. The words landed harder than intended, or perhaps exactly as intended. The square grew quieter. Mr. Doubt nodded slowly. So tolerance, he said, extends only to your boundary. To the truth, she said. Your truth, he replied. She did not answer, for in Clearfield, people began to notice something that had been there all along, that those who speak of space also draw its limits, that those who speak of peace also exclude, that those who speak of equality also define what is equal, and that the fiercest struggle is not always about allowing difference, but about deciding what difference is allowed. The blue champion still stood in the square, her cloak just as blue, her words just as sharp. But there was something altered in her gaze. Not less conviction, but less room. And the people still listened. Only now. Also to what was not being said. Evenfall. In the town of Evenfall, where differences had been carefully set aside, a new sign stood at the entrance. It was tastefully made, in neutral tones, bearing a message no one could object to. Welcome to the zone of general description. Mayor Plainwell took quiet pride in it. He valued clarity, especially the kind that did not trouble anyone. Beside him stood Mr. Definition, a thoughtful man who once collected words but now handled them with restraint. A little further off was Mr. Order, who preferred rules, provided they did not cut too sharply. It is calmer this way, said the mayor. No distinctions, no disputes. No labels, said Mr. Definition. And so, no misunderstandings. And no exceptions, added Mr. Order with satisfaction. On the square stood the townspeople. Some felt included. Others felt unmentioned. But mentioning had become an old habit. The first complication arrived with the warden, a man whose keys carried the sound of consequence. We require classification, he said, for safety, for structure. Classification leads to distinction, said Mr. Definition carefully. And without it, said the warden, we have problems. Problems often come from outdated thinking, said the mayor. The warden nodded, though not entirely. Reality does not always update itself, he replied. A committee was formed. It often was, when reality proved uncooperative. In time, a report was delivered. We have adopted open arrangement, said Mr. Order. Everyone is treated the same. That sounds fair, said the mayor. Until it isn't, said the warden quietly. No one recorded that. Not long after, the Athletic Association came forward. They had a field, a clock, and a concern. The matches are different, said the chairperson. Not worse intended, but different. Equality requires identical rules, said Mr. Definition. But identical rules do not produce identical outcomes, said the chairperson. Outcome is a sensitive word, said the mayor. The scoreboard uses it anyway, said the chairperson. They all looked at the scoreboard. It offered no opinion, only numbers. Perhaps we should count less, suggested Mr. Definition. Then we are left with feeling, said the chairperson, and that is hard to rank. This, too, was noted, though without resolution. Then a report came to the watch office. Someone had gone missing. That was serious, because disappearance resists nuance. We must issue a description, said the coordinator. Without distinctions, reminded Mr. Definition. But recognition requires features, said the coordinator. Features can exclude, said the mayor. And without them, said the coordinator, we find no one. A silence followed, not neutral in the least. Then describe generally, said Mr. Order. General resembles everyone, said the coordinator, and therefore no one. A notice was issued, carefully excluding nothing. It yielded nothing. In the days that followed, Evenfall grew quieter, not because things were resolved, but because fewer people were certain how to speak. Mr. Definition sat before his empty index cards. Words are tools, he said, but also blades. And without tools, said Mr. Order, nothing is built. The mayor looked again at the sign. It stood there, impeccable and reassuring. We have chosen caution, he said, and caution chooses as well, said Mr. Definition. On the square, the warden stood with fewer keys than before. Without distinction, he said, I must explain afterward what should have been clear beforehand. At the field, the games continued. The results were spoken more softly, but they still occurred. And somewhere beyond the town, the search went on. Without a description anyone could recognize. The mayor did not remove the sign. That would have been a decision. But he looked at it longer than necessary. There is no neutral outcome, he said at last. Only a choice that calls itself neutral, and consequences that do not. No one disagreed, for in Evenfall they had begun to learn that avoiding difference is itself a difference. Only one that becomes visible when it is too late to name it.